today.
I have one personal question for you.
Yeah.
Can I go on your YouTube and sample you saying "Howdy Doody Buckaroonies" and then just
Go for it.
the word? Good, because I also sneakily got you to say the words. You're listening to the World of Eora and podcast, so I can just create a MacGuffin of you saying that.
Or we could just, if this is still recording.
Technically, it is. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, howdy doody, buckaroonies. And then we've got two options. You're listening to the World of Eora podcast, or you're listening to the World of Eora podcast.
You know what? I think I'll use both. Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed, as created by Obsidian Entertainment. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you all for listening. Let's get into today's lore.
Howdy doody, buckaroonies. You're listening to the World of Eora podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special episode of the World of Eora. That is someone else who is joining me on today's episode. But before we dive into that, let me just get the introduction out of the way. My name is Eric, aka Gingerino, host of the podcast. And today is a very special episode for you guys, which you'll probably already recognize if you look at the title of today's episode. As well in a couple minutes when we dive into a really good conversation. But this is the World of Eora, and this is where we look at the video games of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, and the now, as of this episode being uploaded anyways, the full release of Avowed. All of these games set in the World of Eora. And so what we've been doing for the past 4 years is just diving into the history, lore, and game mechanics of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, gearing up for the release of this game, which is now out. So now we're going to be shifting focus onto the lore that we've seen Avowed and tying it back to Pillars of Eternity. Now, the game's been out for 5 days in early access, and I have got my hands on it, and I do want to talk about it, but I was able to sit down with Cameron, aka Venus Theory, the composer for the soundtrack of Avowed, and he's not here right now with me. I kind of cut his audio in as the intro, and we're going to get into the talk right away, but I just wanted to transition you guys into it and let you know what to expect. We sat down to talk about the soundtrack, and we ended up having a conversation about a lot of different things, about music production and creating things on YouTube, and good advice for just living life in general. We talked about video games a whole bunch. We talked about how to create a soundtrack specifically for video games, and we talked about some specific tracks and pieces within the Avowed soundtrack itself. So we covered a lot of topics. We originally actually only were going to sit down for an hour, and after the hour was up, I had closed out the episode, and Venus Theory was kind of like, well, I got some more time. You want to rapid fire some questions? So we did a whole bunch more, and it ended up being almost twice as long. So I kind of cut all those questions out and put them somewhere in the middle. So it might seem a little like the topic randomly shifts back to a different topic out of nowhere, and that's just because I kind of cut some of those back in. But it was a really great conversation. If you don't already know who Venus Theory is, I highly recommend you check out his stuff. Not just his YouTube content, but the art that's on there as well as the music that he produces. He has a lot of really great things to say, a lot of good resources. If you're into music production, he offers a lot of free plugins and sample tracks and courses to help you be better at it. And I think he's got a really good perspective on stuff. He's also got a way better mic than I do. It just sounds way more professional. It was awesome to sit down and talk with him, and I'm excited for you guys to be able to listen to the conversation, talking about video game soundtracks, the Avowed soundtrack, working with Obsidian, etc., etc. So that's everything to cover right now. Nothing newsworthy to really mention other than things we probably all know, which is that the game is out and it's available to play. So hopefully, you're listening to this at work or on your commute, and you can get home later today and try out the game. I'm excited to dive into it even more, and I'll put out an episode next weekish of my thoughts on the opening parts, my impressions, and things about the game, talking about the world as well. And then I'll start chugging out the lore after that. I took a few days off so that I could really dive into it. It's going to be fun. Let's dive into today's episode.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode. As promised from last week, this week we got a special thing to talk about, and not just because Avowed is out in early access, and I have got my hands on it. I have played it. I do have some opinions. I'm liking it, but I have something else that I think is more important that I'd rather talk about today, and that is we have Venus Theory online with us here today to talk about Avowed and the score and just games and everything in general. So first thing we should do, I guess, is get you introduced. Do you prefer Venus Theory, Mr. Theory, Cameron,
Mr.
Papa
Theory
Venus?
was
I
my
don't like that
father.
last
Yeah, Papa Venus. Yeah, it's funny. Like I actually pretty regularly get asked if Venus is my real name, and I always like to mess with people. Go, no, Mars. Actually, like my parents are really weird like that. No, yeah, Venus or Cameron's fine. It doesn't really matter to me.
one. All right, good. 'Cause if you had told me something ridiculous, I would have stuck with the bit. So Cameron, tell us a little bit about who you are, because there's going to be some people jumping on the show, because this is going to be a clickbaity title. I'm going to be honest with you here. So for those who might not be familiar, tell us a little bit about who you are, what is it you do, and what's your connection to the world of Eora.
Yeah, so I'm Cameron, but better known as Venus Theory. I'm a musician and sound designer and YouTuber by proxy, I guess, which a little bit of everything. I've been a musician for like my entire life. Grew up playing in bands and whatnot, and played as a session player in a bunch of bands. Did all kind of the touring things and all that. Eventually started my YouTube channel. That picked up quite a bit of steam and started working a lot more in the composition end through that, writing for ads and other, like trailer music-y things, doing a lot of sound design work with companies within the music industry, and writing a lot of commission pieces in that space as well for like Instagram promos for like a new synthesizer plugin or things like that. And then I've worked with sample and loop companies producing sample packs and music software presets and all that kind of stuff. And from there got into a lot more media composition for like short films and even other YouTube channels, which has been super fun. And weirdly, a lot of apps, which I didn't know was a space that actually required original music. I always thought like mobile app games were more of a you just buy some stock music thing.
Yeah.
But that was actually my way into game scoring, and my first kind of exposure to writing for video games was through apps, which was really fun. And then Avowed obviously is probably the biggest title I've done so far, and I'm also working on Ground Branch, which is like a first person action shooter game that I'm super hyped on, and then currently working on 2 to 3 titles allegedly this year, because the game industry is kind of on fire at the moment. But 2 or 3 other titles I'm working on this year that I'm pretty excited for as well.
Wow, you got a lot going on all at once.
Yeah, I kind of decided to give up sleeping, and it turns out that made me a lot more productive.
Yeah, I mean, sleep is for the weak. I've heard many people say that.
Right. Well, and then you just get excited on an idea, and I think that's my problem is just I'm very, very, very passionate about whatever my brain gets hooked on that week. So, one week I'm just like, I'm gonna make a bunch of samples from my bathroom, and then the next week is like, I want to make a YouTube video about like the philosophical ethics of AI. But I think that's just kind of the nature of creative work is you can't dilute it all into one medium or you'll lose your mind.
The ability that you have to be able to just focus on something like that. Some people would call that a superpower, honestly. Just having the focus and motivation in the first place.
It's hard, yeah, and I mean, especially on something like Avowed, where it's like it ate up, a year of my life, and that's in recent memory the longest project I've worked on.
I mean, we're definitely going to touch on that whole year throughout this little conversation.
I guess on the Aora end, I forgot to talk about that. Actually, was not super familiar with the Pillars franchise. I knew of it. I've been a gamer like my whole life. I grew up in a very, very, very small town, so gaming was like all I had to do. And playing games like Morrowind and Fallout and Oblivion and the Hitman franchise, Ratchet and Clank, games like that. Love those to pieces. So I knew of Pillars, but I didn't have a computer. I was on console, so I just didn't have a way to like play Pillars, but knew vaguely of it, and then was mostly reintroduced to it, funny enough, through this podcast after I got the Avowed gig, because I just had to immerse myself about as deep as I possibly could. And it turns out that's a very deep rabbit hole, as I'm guessing you would know.
Yeah. As someone who thought this was going to be a 6-month little passion project and then be done after that, there is a lot to talk about. 4 years going, and we're still not even done. And now we have even more to talk about, obviously.
But I think that's the cool part of it, though, is I don't know, game studios and stuff sometimes don't put in that level of effort to craft things, and I think that's what I love about Obsidian titles in particular. Is there's just so many layers to everything, for better or for worse. I mean, it's kind of a commitment to really get into the, you know, weeds of everything, but I think it is super cool, and I think it made for a really interesting project this time around.
So you already mentioned all the different games you played. I know you called yourself a degenerate gamer at one point in time.
I have
What
some disgusting hour logs in a few games. Like, I'm not super proud of them.
what's your worst or second worst?
Uh,
Let's not
let's
outshare
see.
that quick.
I would say my worst overall probably is Arma. Arma 2, especially through the DayZ mod. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Just have a obscene amount of hours through that. Arma 3 as well. I've got easily thousands of hours in. Fallout 4, I know, is close to 4,000 hours. New Vegas, I don't even know because I had New Vegas on Xbox years and years ago and played it probably twice a year, and I still play it. I know I have at least 2,000 hours in New Vegas on my account here, so it's pretty bad. And then, you know, games like Hitman and things like that that just tickle my lizard brain. Those have some pretty
Hey,
disgusting, you know, 800 plus hour logs, which isn't the worst. Like out of my friends I know who just like don't do anything but game, especially my streamer friends have some insane hours, but yeah, I'm pretty into games.
that's awesome. I mean, that's got to be helpful when you're writing the composition for the score.
Funny
Having
enough, a lot of composers don't play the game.
I
Most of
heard
my
that.
composer friends don't actually play the games that they score, which is interesting. I understand it, but I also just completely don't get it at all. But I
Yeah.
guess it's just kind of different. It's different creative approaches. Like as a musician or an artist of any type, you're going to have your own way that you do things. You know, because some people show up and write on a film or something and just knock it out of the park just by watching it and writing. But then you think of like, you know, maybe Howard Shore on Lord of the Rings is a good example where he spent ages just diving through the lore and the notes and calling up different things. And, you know, in some people's cases, that's useful. In some cases, it's more useful just to go on like a gut feeling and first impressions.
Okay. Because I was actually going to ask about that of why people wouldn't want to play something that they're also writing for, but it kind of makes sense, I guess, depending on what their process is.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. It's hard because on my end that would purely just be speculation. I've never written for something that I haven't like played or experienced directly, whether it's like a film or a game or an ad or something. But I think it just comes down to the creative process ultimately. Like Jason Graves, he's a pretty good friend of mine. He's written on Dead Space and Far Cry and things like that. He doesn't play the games at all, but I think he also, by way of I guess more classical training, would have a more standardized toolbox to pull from that I think he has a very innate understanding of things in a way that I experience differently. So he would be able to look at, say, like a script and an outline and pull an idea from that better than I would just by reading a script or something. I'm very much a visual person, so I have to kind of experience things in a different way than just a pitch in order to write for it effectively, I think.
Getting on like actually the topic of like soundtrack design, obviously that's got to be like a pretty chaotic thing to try to score for, right? Because I mean, if you're writing, like you said, like for Lord of the Rings, you know every bloody frame that's happening at any point in time. You know where the protagonist is, you know what's happening in the environment, you know what's going on at every single second, so you can write music that goes along with that. But with a game, I mean, you don't know if the gamer is trying to sneak around combat or if they're in photo mode trying to take a pretty picture of the vista or if they're jumping up and down an invisible wall trying to clip out the bloody map. Like how do you write music for something with such a chaotic element to it?
I personally, that's why I'm most drawn to writing for video games is I'm fascinated by the idea of processes and the way things tick together and systems. I'm a very analytical person at heart, and I love picking things like that apart because when we experience general music, you know, you listen to your favorite albums or whatever, it's very much a time linear experience. We're listening to a song and it's going to go the same way from start to finish every single time. Whereas in coming from more of my background on like the experimental music end of things, if you think of something like music at an art exhibit, where let's say it's a bunch of light bulbs in a room and they flash at different times or something, how do we design a system to complement that? Because we have to ask some new questions we're not normally asked as musicians. Instead of what does this song sound like, it's what is this listener looking at? What are they doing? How are they listening to it? How long are they listening to it for? Are they listening in stereo? Are they listening in surround sound? How many times are they going to experience it that way? Is it going to be ever in a way to where the sound changes based on their location? And there's so many interesting, nuances that emerge from that. And I think with something like Avowed in particular, where you can sink a gajillion hours if you want to 100% the game and also dive into all the little lore dumps with like the notes you find around the world and get all the chests and collectibles and stuff. It raises a very interesting question of how do I make something that's as interesting as possible for 100+ hours? And I think to some end, that's also what made this score particularly divisive, because coming from the experimental end of music, and also just due to the pretty insane time crunch I had to write this score on, we had to design a music system that is immersive, at least as best as we could make it, which is pretty unconventional in a game like a cRPG where we're very used to like very large orchestral themes and such, but being more, I don't know, like the artistically, philosophically end of things, a minimalist in a lot of aspects, I feel that the music has to be justified whenever it does make a very overt appearance. And before we talked about, before we started the recording here, we talked about you playing in Dawnshore. Have you gone up to the top of the lighthouse yet?
Oh yeah, well, one of the first things I did, just like
right, same, literally. That was when I was writing for the region of Dawnshore. I walked around, looked around, saw Paradise. I saw the thicket and the overgrowth. I saw the mountains. I saw the gates and stuff and the river. And this, I'm also referencing an earlier version that's not like still there, but the lighthouse is the first standout to me. So I climbed to the top of the lighthouse, and Kai has his lines and whatever, but just seeing everything from the lighthouse and the way the waves are hitting the shore and stuff, that's where music is important. And I think if you were wandering around in Dawnshore looking at like the Zorup camps and all that, and there's this constant melody just beating you over the head, it would have been really annoying, because I play a lot of games like this. And when I'm playing, Skyrim or something, and I love the Skyrim soundtrack, it's really, really good. But for God's sake, I'm eating a cheese wheel to recover some HP in the woods right now. I really don't need, like it's great, but I don't think it serves the game. And that's the question I'm more interested in answering, is how do we design a music experience and not just a soundtrack?
then that's a hard line to walk, because
It is.
there's a wide expanse of things. I know I was playing the game yesterday, and I was just jumping from rooftop to rooftop, falling down, getting frustrated, but also having just giddy, stupid, gamer fun.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then 20 minutes later, I found 5 books in one room, and I sat down and I just read them all. And it was the same music throughout that entire section. And, it's like to be able to balance that, where it's like, how do we make sure the gamer is having fun when they're goofing around, but also just sitting down reading a book at the same time?
Right. And I think that's where like the more ambient side of the mixes come in a lot better, where it's unobtrusive. And there's a great quote from Brian Eno about ambient music, is that it has to be as interesting as it is ignorable. And I think that was part of it, was designing something that's inoffensive is maybe the wrong word, but something that's complementary to the experience you're likely having at the time that you're hearing this. So it comes back to our question of like the art exhibit. What are you doing? How long are you doing it for? Are you paying attention to this? Are you not really paying attention to this? If you are paying attention, what might you be thinking about? And that's a lot of the stuff I had to play the game to think about, was going through and reading the little lore dumps and finding all the notes and listening to all the side conversations that the NPCs are having, and looking around. And when I'm hearing them say that, what am I looking at? What direction is it coming from? Is it leading me to go somewhere else? And trying to answer those types of questions with the music. And then when it does swell up and get a little more in your face, there's a very explicit reason it does that.
Do you have any like go-to influences for how to like start with things like that? Because like when you're playing a build of the game, it's silent, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Like how do you
which makes games really awkward. It's pretty funny. Because like playing some games, there's games that like DayZ. I'm a huge DayZ guy, and there's not really a soundtrack in DayZ, so I like booting up my playlists underneath that I feel complement my experience and like my interpretation of the game. But it's so funny when you're playing the initial version of a game that is just dead silent, and sometimes there's not even voice acting yet, so it's like the computer voices going, "Oh my God, the city is burning." And you're just like, oh, okay. But you have to think on the composer's end, like, okay, so they're probably going to be like, oh my God, the city is burning and whatever. And you have to think like, okay, so how are they going to say that? What tone are they going to imply? And if we even know who the voice actors are yet,
That's
you know,
true.
because sometimes I might have a sheet of like who the voice actors are, and I could go listen to some other work they've done to kind of get a feeling of like the intonation in their voice and the way they express things and things like that. But other times it's just a computer voice going, "I'm going to bash your skull in," and that sort of takes you out of it. But yeah, when you're playing the initial builds and putting it together, there are a lot of not rules. I'm not a believer in rules, especially with like art, but there are a lot of commonalities and like idiomatic things we draw from. So if we put up like, I don't know, Subway Surfers, if you're familiar, the TikTok thing that everybody puts on videos now to keep people paying attention. If you look at something like Subway Surfers, it's fast paced. There's a lot of primary colors. There's coins. And I think we as gamers and as people have an innate understanding of what that sounds like. Whereas when you boot up something like The Last of Us or Red Dead Redemption 2, there is an unspoken diegetic sound to that universe. So in something like Avowed's case, it was looking around and understanding like the landscapes and the culture and the people and the story and what does that naturally sound like? Like, you know, when something is sad, we have a minor chord, would be like the most basic example of that, right?
Yeah.
And if we extrapolate that a little bit more, what kind of sad are we experiencing? Like, there's a lot of different shades of that I can utilize as the composer. And similarly, on your gameplay experience, there's a lot of ways and systems that we can design to influence or manipulate what it is you're doing. I think maybe Dying Light 2 is a great example of an immersive music experience if you've played that. There's, for anyone listening, there's some fascinating videos from the composer about the Wise system, which is a middleware system, which is how music is put together in video games, where when you're running, it creates like an inertia value. You've been running and you've been doing well for so long, so the music changes based on that. And then you jump over a really high gap over the streets. So the filters sweep up and there's more reverb, kind of like it's, you know, getting more airy and expansive, and then you land and then a big bass drum comes in and hits that like techno, you know, four on the floor rhythm and things like that. And I think there's always an innate understanding we have both as composers and gamers of what the expectation of what this is going to be is. But I think the interesting thing within that process is also understanding what these expectations are and then utilizing them to subvert them into something new.
And this is all stuff that people might not even recognize is happening. But I could,
Which
as you're
is what
describing
I'm
that,
so happy about. What I've seen in the reactions so far is a lot of people who seem to enjoy the game specifically call out the audio experience. Not just my work, but the whole audio team. I think they did a fantastic job on the world of the Living Lands and really bringing Eora to life in a different way than you get in the Pillars games. Because the sound of the Pillars games is great and the soundtrack's great, but like the shift in perspective was so important here because you're playing in first or third person in this game rather than the kind of like isometric view in the original Pillars games. And I think that's such an interesting idea. And that was one of the most important things to me in the soundtrack was how do we change the soundtrack to fit an entirely new perspective of the whole universe? And the sound team did a phenomenal job of that. But on the interesting end, I think it is that when all that stuff is done really well, you just don't notice it. It's very transparent. Because if it's done wrong, your ear picks up on that instantly. But if it's good, you're just like, yeah, that's what a waterfall sounds like.
that's one of those like almost thankless positions, but it's clearly instrumental, pun fully intended.
Yeah.
Well, the overall experience. You've mentioned a few like particular examples. Do you have any particular composers or writers that you draw inspiration from personally?
Yeah, I mean, for me, my influences range a little more outside the world of like orchestral fantasy stuff, obviously. You know, like my biggest influence are easily like Tim Hecker, Ben Frost, and you know, folks like that. Jeff Barrow and I don't know. I'm very like film soundtrack heavy, and I think game soundtrack wise, Dying Light 2, I think is my most recent example of something that I thought was a great example of how music works in the context of a video game. You know, I think that that was something for me. And again, being someone who sits and really thinks about this stuff just all the time, that was an example of wow, that's something that is pushing the entire medium of this forward in terms of like what a gameplay soundtrack experience could be. But then drawing from my realm of things, I'm trying to apply a lot of that in a different way. Like Kaya Project was one of my biggest influences on this score, I think, as well as like Ben Salisbury and Ben Frost easily were just like my touch points of if they wrote the soundtrack for this, what would it sound like? But not trying to be just a diet version of them. And similarly, I didn't want to be diet Justin Bell because that would have been super lame. Like that's already been done. If I got the gig and was told, "Hey, can you just make music like this?" I wouldn't have taken it because that's just not creatively interesting to me.
If they want Justin Bell, they could probably work something out with a contract for
Well,
him.
yeah, exactly. Or you could just get anyone else who would just write music that sounds like someone else. But I don't think as an artist that's fulfilling in any way.
I think a lot of creative people would agree. Like that's
Right.
the thing you want is you want to be yourself. You want to bring what you have to the table and try to like meet also the needs of what they have, not try to fulfill someone else's shoes. I was curious, how did you actually land this gig? Because I know you're not at Obsidian on staff, so you got
No.
this contracted.
Which is kind of funny. It was a very, I don't know, serendipity thing. Ryan Warden, the production director at Obsidian, is a fan of my YouTube channel and fan of my music, and he's been listening to my stuff for years and years. And there was a section of the game early on in the prologue, Fort Northreach, which I'm sure you've experienced by now, where there's been this massacre. It's kind of a pretty dark, moody moment. Not like horror, but spooky. Like there's a mystery there. So I have produced a lot of free instrument libraries for people. It's something I'm very, very into is like giving people tools to make music for free because everything's really expensive and that sucks. And I think people should be able to make music. So I made a free instrument library with a company called UVI that was focused on contemporary cinematic scoring. And it was designed from recording sessions I did here in my home studio with synthesizers and pedals and even an instrument I built back there off camera here, which I could go get and show you if you want. But I made this instrument library, and Ryan was writing kind of some temporary music for Fort Northreach, saying this is what I think Fort Northreach should sound like, and it was using my instrument. And then later on, as the story goes, he was getting a haircut, and he was in traffic listening to my music, and I can't remember what song it was, but there was a song of mine he was listening to, and he said, "There's something there, and I want to go get that guy," because I already used his stuff in the Fort Northreach temp music and whatever. So it was kind of a, I don't know, stars aligning in a very specific way sort of thing. So he reached out to me, and it was funny. I just saw an email from someone named Ryan asking like if I would make video game music. And I didn't even realize it was an @Obsidian email address at first. Cause like, I mean, I get, especially between like YouTube and my music, I get just dozens of emails a day from everybody of just like, "Hey, loved your video," or "Your mustache is weird and you're dumb," and whatever.
I'm glad
So
somebody said it though.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I got the email from Ryan, and it worked out to where it was like I was right at the end of another project and right about in the beginning phase of like picking up the next cycle. So it was just a perfect alignment of like, yep, I've got some time, let's do it. And little did I know how long it would take, but it was super, super fun.
That is crazy. Well, you said you've been an avid gamer for years too. So
Yeah.
when you realized it was Obsidian, was there?
Oh yeah, that was like my heart sank to my butthole moment of like, oh my God. And then too, once I learned what game it was for and all that stuff, it was like, oh, so I've got to get this right or people are just going to eviscerate me.
Oh man,
Like no pressure, just like make a new soundtrack that sounds different for like one of our most beloved franchises. And
and like,
also
man,
and also you have 8 months.
good luck.
Yeah.
Well, I'm feeling 8 months, man, and what you've produced so far. I mean, for me, anyways, I'm a pretty big fan of it. How's
Well,
the
thanks.
reception been for it though?
Pretty divisive, at least from what I've seen so far. But also, we're really early at this point. I mean, we're 2 days out from the early access period. So I think naturally right now is when you get your most passionate people. There's been a lot of really, really positive reception, and then a lot of like really, really negative reception. But that's everything.
Yeah, I if,
and
I feel like if
uh,
we cut out the people who just like we've kind of mentioned before, like who want Pillars of Eternity 3,
yeah.
like if you kind of cut out the preconceived notions, like if people just kind of like soaking it in as it is, accepting it at face value. Me personally, just kind of looking around, it seems like there's been a pretty positive reception.
Yeah, no, all the praise I've received has been great, and a lot of people are just over the moon with it. And funny enough, actually on Twitter and Threads is where I've seen most of like the super ultra positive reception, which I thought was kind of strange because
Huh.
Twitter's kind of a odd place right now. But yeah, and it's one of those things where I was talking with Ryan about this the other day. Actually, there's a great quote that says, "Most of us would rather be ruined by praise than saved by criticism," and I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when you release a piece of art in any kind. If you're passionate about something and you really like taking photos and you get your first photography exhibit at a local art museum, someone's going to come there and just take a big fat dump all over everything you did. Because I think naturally, when you stand up and do something you're passionate about, you cast a shadow. That's a lot more than most people ever really get to do or even try to do, and they don't like that. And also, in this case, we do have franchise expectations to manage, but I was really lucky in that I was not tasked with doing that. Had it been Pillars of Eternity 3, obviously there would have been a completely different approach to the soundtrack.
Oh yeah.
And I think I still would have done a good job with it, but it would have been a little less interesting to me to take that on. But I got really lucky with how the gig was approached to me of, we want you to find the sound of the living lands and this story specifically, while obviously, keeping it in world. Like we can't get too far away from where Pillars goes, but it has to be something that's not a Pillars soundtrack, because this is just not a Pillars game ultimately. And that was really fun and really interesting. And I think, and Ryan told me a lot that was specifically why I was brought on, was just to bring a totally different mood to everything.
And it sounds like it really kind of plays to your strengths. Like when you were announced as a composer for the game, me, like a lot of other people, immediately jumped on your YouTube and your Spotify
Mm.
stuff to see like what's this guy doing and what kind of stuff is he gonna make. And I feel like you said, you would have been able to pull off Pillars 3. But it seems like Avowed is definitely more in your wheelhouse, just based off of like the stuff I've seen you've been doing.
Yeah, and just more creatively fulfilling. Like I said, if it would have been, hey, can you make Pillars 3? I don't think I would have taken the gig, just because like it's the gig of a lifetime, obviously, to do an Obsidian game, but it's just, I'm not I'm very much an artist at my core,
Yeah.
obviously. So it's just, I don't care. I don't want to make the thing someone else did. That's not fun to me, and that's just making money doing something, and like there's a lot of other ways to do that.
People at Obsidian have said the same things. I think he'd be in good company, like Josh Sawyer or Tim
Mhm.
Kaine. He's often said that he doesn't want to make a game if it's not interesting to him personally, even if it
Yeah,
would
and
make
and
him
that's
a
the thing
million
is
bucks.
like, when I get put in a gig like this and I see people that are so passionate about this game and this story and doing something different with it, that's the stuff that really excites me. If it was just like, hey, we're gonna make this again and we're doing it just because we need to make money, like that's just lame. And I
Yeah.
think that ends up showing in the final product.
So you've mentioned on previous like some videos I've watched on your YouTube that when you get on projects like this, oftentimes the companies will give you like a list of things they want. They want these emotions in these areas and they want you to hit these particular moments. What kind of like laundry list did Obsidian give you when you got signed onto the gig?
Nothing too specific, thankfully. It was very much an open-ended kind of carte blanche. What is your interpretation of this? But obviously, it was like, don't make a EDM soundtrack, because that
I
that
I
would
would
have
have
been
liked to
really
see how
weird.
that goes.
It would have been really funny, but yeah, it was pretty straightforward. It was mostly just some of the emotional tones that we were trying to hit in the story. And funny enough, most of the music brief was defined by something I said to them in my initial pitch, which was, what attracted me to this game is that it's not a hero's journey. It's a hero's mystery. And I think that's something way more interesting, because we've done a hero's journey a million times over in gaming. But this is more of a mystery story. And I love that aspect to it, as well as the idea, which I talked to Carrie about pretty at length. It's not about the choices you make, it's about the consequences of them. And I was fascinated through this whole project about what is the sound of consequence, because that can mean so many different things. So It was mostly emotional touch points and then a couple reference playlists, which I asked for. I asked everyone I was talking to at Obsidian, what music are you listening to right now? And like, I don't care if it's, like fantasy music or whatever, just what are you listening to? So people were sending in, the stuff you'd probably expect, like the Pillar soundtrack, the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, some of the stuff from Game of Thrones and things like that. But there was stuff like ABBA thrown in there. There was like a lot of Fleetwood Mac. There was some Pink Floyd. There was a lot of other things like that. The soundtrack from Annihilation was in there a bunch. And from there, it was a matter on the artistic end of looking at the playlists and things people were playing, especially the things that were very unexpected. Like ABBA was a really weird one, but they were like, I'm really into this album right now. And it was just kind of trying to understand sort of the composite average of opinions between these different genres and styles and songs and albums and whatever. Like, what moods are these ultimately getting at, and how are we going to embody that within the score, let alone within a dynamic orchestral-ish score?
I love that because you talk a lot about how music is just feeling.
Yeah.
And from a personal experience, like that's something that you've helped me to understand, like to appreciate music even more, just like how music is on its own a feeling. And that was one thing I was wondering was what was some of the major feelings or emotions that you were like having as touchstones for Avowed? Like you said, what was the sound of consequence? I know consequence isn't
Yeah.
a feeling, but still that idea. That's a really interesting, even psychological idea to come at.
Yeah, I think it obviously varies based on where you are in the game, because as we start out in the prologue, we are the envoy, we're with the Adiran Empire, and we're gonna go solve the mystery, and then we crash at the island, and then we're going to Fort Northreach, and the moods change pretty quickly between there. So starting off in the prologue, as an example, the music is kind of fantastical adjacent, but there's a lot of kind of tension underneath it. But it is very beautiful because we're on this like very colorful, bright island. It's very textural, which is really important to me, just to give you this feeling of there's something going on here. And then by the time we reach Fort Northreach, we're getting more into mystery and different shades of fear and sort of a representation of where the story is ultimately going to go, I think. And that's where I start to pull in. I mean, by the time you reach Fort Northreach, you really start to hear some of the more experimental things. There was a lot of stuff with an upright bass that was run through some really advanced multiband processing in my computer system to make it into the Fort Northreach theme, that da 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 thing. But there's this element in there I called the Dream Scourge bass, which is the plague that the Emperor has tasked you with finding the source of. So throughout the score, you'll hear the Dream Scourge bass again. But at that point, all I'm doing is alluding to it. We don't know that it's involved there yet. We're just kind of, we know of it, but we don't know where any of this is going. And with a lot of things, and I'll avoid spoilers as much as I can, but with a lot of things, there's so many hints in the soundtrack of where do these things fit together and where do they come together in the end, which I think is something, if you play the game and listen to the soundtrack, you'll pick up on. Like the character themes and the themes of each region are all very much embedded in the music. And like the theme of the Living Lands itself is this wild, untamed feeling, which is in every sound in the soundtrack. There's lots of little textures and evolving things and kind of different world instruments. And that's sort of in the compositional end what we would refer to as metatonal design. Whereas on like the second region of the game, Emerald Stair, which you haven't gotten into yet, but I'll drop you this and I'll leave you to explore it. But I don't know if you're familiar with like synesthesia at all, where like when you have senses kind of cross wired.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I'm
So
not
for
personally
me,
speaking, but
music is like very much a visual process. Like when I make music or hear music, I see things, and that's how I work as a composer, which I think is why I serve something better when I'm able to very directly experience the game, and I think that's why I kind of have to play the game. So in the second region of the game, it's a very verdant, kind of green, lush area that's mostly farmland, but it's now afflicted by the Dream Scourge. So it's sort of foggy, and I just got this idea of like acid rain and sort of like a poisoned farmland and whatever. So to me, the emotion was, what if nature was sick? And what does that sound like? And how do I draw that feeling in there while also motifically developing the theme of Emerald Stair, the second region, which you will hear again as you get through the dungeons within Emerald Stair. And then finally, it comes together in this just beautiful coalescence at the final, I guess we'll call it a dungeon in Emerald Stair. But by the time you hear the theme of Emerald Stair again, you've learned so many new things about what's going on in the story that by the time you hear that theme again, you just get this whole new context to that emotion. And I think that's a really interesting idea and something that I think people will pick up on the soundtrack. Because even in the title theme, for example, because you've played the prologue in Dawnshore, if you play the title theme and listen to the first melody that comes out, da, 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 that thing, that's the Avowed theme. It's in like almost every track in the game, or at least alluded to a little bit or used as kind of a tying melodic element. But all of the character themes are in the title theme. And the first melody you hear in the title theme, which is that kind of weird bowed instrument, is the first melody you hear in the prologue. So within the title theme, I'm also kind of telling you the story of the game and where it's going to go. You just don't know that yet. And I love doing stuff like that.
When those 3 tracks on the NME article were released, I was like, I guarantee you he told us everything and we just aren't aware of it yet. And I personally, I love that. You called it, what was it, metatonal?
Metatonal design.
And the design, I love that there are all these like these connective tissues between the different pieces across the entire soundtrack that link it all together.
Which is important to me, though, because it's like, if I'm going to write the soundtrack for this game, it has to be justified. And again, just from that like minimalist philosophy, if there is music, it has to be there for a reason. So when I'm giving you like these melodic things or whatever, I only want to do that when it's really, really necessary and contributes something to the grander picture of the whole thing. And I like, my hope is that 12-year-old me playing Oblivion for the first time, that kid is going to be out there playing this game and hopefully hear this soundtrack and go, damn, that was really cool that like that thing was in there and I heard it again here, but then it was like really big and neat. And I hope that kid is going to go on and make an Obsidian soundtrack too someday, because that would be awesome. But those are the things I'm interested in, is like hiding sort of little musical Easter eggs to where you really have to be paying attention to understand them.
I think that honestly, that is a big reward for people to catch those things. Are you going to, because I want to ask 100 questions about that, but we only have so much time. I do want to know, are you going to do a video on your channel breaking any of that down?
To some degree, I'm planning a video about kind of the entire process and sort of what I learned from it and, where it all came together and kind of what I took away from it. But the more point that I think is critical to that video is just the idea that, like, if I can do this, then literally anyone can. Like, it dispelled a lot of myths for me in what it's like to work on, a AAA game title, because you think you have to have these like big studios and da, 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 da. I made the whole soundtrack from here in my home studio, which is just a bonus room above my garage. And that's awesome. I know. And that's like not something you think is even possible. And some of that, we had much bigger plans for the soundtrack, but because of the time scale that it had to be produced on, just some of it naturally got pushed to the wayside for like, we can either get this done or we can spend another year on it. But, I think that's kind of the point I want to make there. But I am producing an entire course, actually, that I'm going to be releasing hopefully next month that breaks down the entire Avowed soundtrack. Right now, it's like 80 videos.
Oh, wow.
Where I firsthand, from the horse's mouth, I walk you through everything in the score and how it was put together, including all the stuff that's not on the actual soundtrack.
I definitely, just to make sure people will know where to find that. Where can they find that when it does come out?
That'll be on my Gumroad page, and I'll put out a YouTube newsletter, or however that works.
That was a question more for me than anything else, because I'm like, I need to.
Yeah, I'll send you a copy when it's done. You'd probably like it, especially if you're not like super tied into music, just to see how the sausage gets made.
So we asked about like how you started and your general process. What is the Venus theory approach to when you're writing a specific piece, like one piece of the soundtrack? Like, once you've nailed down, I want it to feel like this, I have this kind of a vision, what's your process for the actual writing?
Yeah, so generally I will boot up the game and I'll have OBS open and I'll get a screen recording just to make sure, but I'll play through the game pretty much in order. Sometimes you have to do it out of order just for development milestones and things like that, where like, well, we're finishing this region first and then we're going to come back to this region. So it's not exactly chronological, but I try as much as I can to experience things that way. And I will go into the game, get a screen recording, grab that recording and dump it into my DAW, my music production software. And that's when I'll start putting together the music. I'll look against the footage and against the natural sounds, at least as much as is in there, and try and understand like what feelings is this giving me? What did I notice? Who did I talk to? What were their motivations? What are my motivations? What do I know? What do I not know? Where is all this going to go? How can I allude to that? Is there a theme I could develop a little more here and things like that? So it mostly starts out on a piano generally for me, or a guitar or something, just whatever instrument is kind of gravitating my brain at that moment of like, oh, I should grab the dilruba or like my ukulele or whatever, just the thing that kind of sounds the most like what I'm feeling at that moment. And I'll just kind of sketch out like the chord progression or a melody or an idea for a melody. And then it just kind of gets developed more and more from there. So I would start off with kind of a bones session, usually with just a piano and then like another piano patch that does the melody. And then I'll start orchestrating that. Okay, the intro is here. What types of sounds are in the intro? How are they evolving? And then if there's like in Dawn Shore and the prologue and some of the earlier regions, it's much more standard orchestral stuff. So in that case, that's when I bring out like the strings. Okay, what are the violins doing? And what are the violas doing? And the cello and the bass? And are there woodwinds? And how are they paired together? And who's taking what? And all that stuff. But it's pretty straightforward. It's mostly like, what are the chords? What's the melody? What's the mood? And then it's just trying to build that out as much as I can. But in the case of something like the cutscenes, it's more straightforward. You're going to watch that cutscene and it's going to play front to back the same way every single time. But in the case of like the exploration music, I effectively had to write every track 5 times or 7 times in some cases, based on the groups of music we would export that the game engine then puts together on the fly. So that's a little more difficult.
Oh man, that I can't even wrap my head around. I mean, obviously you had like months to do that and you were a professional at it, but that is insane. And it still blows my mind that you can do that all just like from where the room I'm looking at
Mhm.
on this chat. You can do that all there. It is insane that kind of
Well,
that
it's crazy
scale
because
of a
like
thing.
even when I was growing up, the way you made music was completely different. I'm not that old. I'm 31, but when I was a kid, it was you had to have a studio and a big mixing console, and you had to have Pro Tools and all this really expensive stuff. But you can have an iPad and make great music now. It's crazy, and some of the software to make music is free. Like there's great free libraries and samples and music making software out there, or stuff that's very low cost. My first audio interface was like $800, and it was garbage compared to like the ones that we have today for, $99.
So basically, all you need is the tenacity to do it. Then you could
Pretty much.
probably.
And I'm a big believer in that idea that if you're passionate about something on a long enough time scale, success is just an inevitability.
So that's your overall process for how you like
Yeah.
to approach writing. Did Avowed offer any specific challenges that was like
Oh God. Yeah, we're gonna need a longer episode. I think the biggest challenge was probably the time scale and the lack of being able to record with a real orchestra, which is something I really would have liked to do, but we just couldn't do that. I was brought on really, really late in the game, literally and metaphorically speaking. And the first, I guess we did it in about 8 months, the entire soundtrack, which I think is like closing in on maybe almost 3 hours of music altogether. And then the final soundtrack's like an hour 45, give or take, the released OST. But obviously there's tons of other incidental music and stuff in a game like this, and then all the little like spot call moments that it's like 15 seconds of like ba ba ba, and then that's just all that's there. So the first month was a lot of the negotiations and contracts and and pitch demos and meetings and stuff. The second month was just testing things and trying to design a music system, which on a 7-month time scale is insane to be able to pull together, like, how is music going to adapt and react to what you're doing? And then it was really like I had about 6 months in my home studio to just write a really good score for a huge game, which was challenging. And we really tried to get an orchestra put together, but naturally stuff like that, once we orchestrate everything, you get all the sheets made and whatnot, then we have to get an arranger to look them over and a conductor and hire an orchestra and book a studio and things like that. And there was no time.
Yeah.
because that stuff books, years in advance in some cases, depending on the orchestra you're working with. But I tried to use that as much as I could as an advantage. I was very into the idea of a hero's mystery, like I said early on. And to me, I thought that was best represented by almost an uncanny valley factor within the music, to where if we have to use sample libraries, let's use them to the point to where we're taking advantage of what we can do with samples that I could not do with an orchestra. Because some of the, like, especially the really textural things you hear in a lot of the themes, it's made up of effectively 3 different instrument sections doing 3 different things, and then I'm fading between them in my software on the fly. And if I had to conduct that live, there's no way I'd be able to do that.
That's another 8 months on its own just to figure that
Exactly.
out.
So it was a matter of like, okay, if I have to do this, then let's push that as far as we can to do something kind of interesting. And I was really obsessed with a lot of things like that, of like, when you do a pitch bend in a sample library, it feels really weird. And in some cases, there's samples where it's only one sample instead of what's called round robins, where it picks a random one so you don't hear that it's the same loop. But there's some where it is only one loop. So why not use that and keep it looping to where it's like a tape loop type of thing? And how do we use that to represent the themes we're going to expose in the story? And even some of the instruments in the game are not real at all. Have you gone to Paradise yet, the city?
Yep. Oh yeah, I've pretty much explored all of Dawn Shortly.
When you hear the main melody in Paradise, the da 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 da, the theme of Paradise, it's not a real instrument at all. I invented that in the computer.
What?
That string thing, it's like wow, 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 and it sounds like a bell with a string. It's not real at all. And I thought that was a really cool idea. So that's what's called physical modeling synthesis, where we can use software to create an idea of what an instrument would be. So is it made of wood? Is it made of metal? How large is it? Is it very resonant? Is it bright or dark? Is it plucked? Is it bowed? Is it hit with a mallet? What is the mallet made of? Does the mallet bounce? And, things like that. So in the case of Paradise, for example, I live outside of like Nashville, Tennessee area, not like out in the country, but Nashville, Tennessee area. So I was thinking a lot about buskers, and in Paradise, what would they be playing? And why would they be playing that? What types of instruments would people who live here build? And, we have trees and things like that. We have animals and farms. So like gut strings would probably exist, or metal strings would exist because they have the workshop in the market. So, and the city is pretty developed, so we can assume this is a later stage civilization. They probably have people who are like luthiers who build, guitars or violins or things of that nature. So it was like, okay, maybe because of early music and how it was put together, they would make things that are kind of drone based, so like a tambour or a sitar or something like that. So that was kind of the lead instrument of Paradise, and the Paradise theme was inventing the instrument that's probably the most common thing you would hear in this realm. And then the way that the rhythm is put together in Paradise in kind of an odd time signature was thinking about like street drummers in New Orleans and places like that. Or I was listening to a lot of South American and like African drum music, and just thinking about the concepts of like rhythms and how are they put together and what are they made of. So thinking of Dawn Shore, if you go to the Zorup camps, you'll see the drums they have. They're large, thick wooden shell animal skin frame drums. So I was using things like the bodhran and instruments like that are large format shelled animal skin drums, and trying to build that sound based on what we diegetically assume as the player.
It's fascinating to hear like the technical and purposeful decisions for it. Like it sounds like every time, like you said, everything that's in there has to have a purpose. Like
Exactly.
for music. I love
So
it.
I did some live stuff on the soundtrack, not as much as I would have liked to, but again, that's just a matter of like time and whatnot. Like to book a bunch of woodwind players to do the woodwind section, we can't do that. But there is a lot of stuff I did on my own. I have my cello, my violin, my viola, so I played a lot of parts. I even made an instrument. The bowed banjo is on the soundtrack quite a bit, where it was Galwain's Tusks. There's a region where there's this really interesting bowed string sound. It's called a tambour. And as you can imagine, Nashville isn't exactly the mecca of traditional Turkish instruments, so I couldn't really buy one. But it's basically just a really big banjo that you bow. So I bought a banjo and played it with a bow, and that's one of my favorite instruments on the soundtrack because it's just a weird approach to a sound we already know. And then in one song, one of the last songs in the game, I actually got my wife to do vocals on, which is really, really cool.
That's awesome. I'm gonna look forward to that when I hit Galloway's Tusk. It's interesting because like you actually there's some stuff that just me being a lore nerd of this world that even kind of rings true in the writing. Like you're taking things that like obviously you want to do a live orchestra, but you're putting it through like samples and stuff like that. And I love that attitude you guys bring of we're gonna try to make this work. Like we're gonna make this an advantage. It's not just gonna be the second option. We're gonna make this the primary option. And you're like creating these synthesized instruments on your programming, and I find that it matches a lot with fantasy because, like,
Mhm.
as an example in the world, coffee is called Merc Brew.
Yeah.
It's like you have this thing that is like what we have in our real world, but it's not. It's in this world, and it's like it's almost sounds like the soundtrack was created in that same kind of way, where it's like it is alluding to real life stuff, and in some cases, actual things that you recorded on.
And I
But a
think
lot
that's
of it,
why fantasy games and cRPGs are so special, to gamers and stuff, and even me, is like the fun of the game is that you self-insert so much, and the way that we experience it is so highly personalized with whatever our life experiences are, and we read that into our character that we spend hours creating in some cases to make the perfect avatar for our experience in this world. So it was a really cool opportunity to not only get to play a game and have that experience of kind of self-inserting my life into this game and experiencing it through my lens, but then extracting that and saying, now what does that sound like? Like that's the coolest opportunity in the world.
few specific songs in particular. We already talked about parodies, which I love. It's a medley of like different instrumentation. Every 40 seconds, I feel like I'm in a new
Yeah.
place. And we talked about that. So I would like to actually, because this is, Lore podcast and it has to do with Pillars of Eternity, I would like to ask about like the collaboration experience with Justin Bell that is featured in the track Rituals on the soundtrack. Like, how
Yeah,
did that happen?
Justin wasn't involved in that at all. Actually, it's a credit just because we used Aethys's theme in
Okay.
there.
That's
So
what I
if you have you played Dawn Treader yet?
Yes, I've played Dawn Treader. I thought I heard some like a melody that sounded familiar.
Yeah, yeah. So that Rituals is the song that occurs in Dawn Treader. So because you're going into a shrine to Aethys when you get down to the major shrine, it was obviously really important to call Aethys's themes because they've been established in the musical universe of Pillars of Eternity. Like this is Aethys's song. So in that case, it was lifting some of the melodies from Justin Bell's Aethys track and then sort of extracting something new from that. So most of that track is built around that core melody, but then saying, where would that melody go from here? And what other instruments would it be played with as it applies to the context of what we're experiencing within the living lands? Which is really fun. And there's a pretty opaque nod to it in like the first quarter of the track. There's actually the same harp arpeggio and then the string line that's played in octaves and whatever, which is really, really fun. But the first time you hear Aethys's line is actually played with a bansuri at the very, very beginning of the track. And it's super kind of in the background. And then it just develops from there, which is really, really fun. And there's some other kind of, I guess, meta nods to lore things. Even in the titles, Prey becoming Predator occurs after Galwain's tusk, and Galwain being the god of the hunt and such. That's I guess his ultimate goal, right, is for Prey to become Predator. And in the story of the game, I'm not going to get into it, but that's what happens. You now own the choices that you're going to make. So it was important to leave nods like that in there for people who are in the know, you know.
I know I was dissecting each one of the song titles to see if I could get it. I love the purposefulness even in the naming of the tracks.
Well, and it's super important to call things like that too, because again, it's just how I develop my understanding of like what is this music going to sound like and why, and where is it coming from. Which that was a lot of my process of playing the game, was going through reading the lore, and then every day going to the gym and stuff, listening to like 2 or 3 episodes of this podcast, and just learning everything I could about like what are the references to music. Do they talk about what instruments there are? So in the region of Galwain's Tusk, we are in the Pargrunan domain, for example. So in that region, you'll actually hear a lot of choral-ish tracks that lean more into choir arrangements, and the combat music even gets into some shouts, like very guttural shouts and chants, because of the Pargrunan chant. It's a very important thing to that culture. And as we get into the region of Galwain's Tusk, we go to... I'm just like trying to keep everything super spoiler free here.
Yeah, I got any of it out, so don't worry about it.
Okay, so we we go to like the Pargrunan domain effectively, and we get into a major place, and some stuff goes down there. And it was really important to nail down that like if we're here and we're dealing with the kith of the Pargrunan, we have to nod to their specific culture and keep the music diegetic to what that region is going to sound like because of the music that would be developed here.
What was the hardest song to write?
Oh God, Shatterscarp, easily. The Shatterscarp Overlands theme, Frontiers is the name of that track. So Shatterscarp, from a lore perspective, is, well, Shatterscarp and Thirdborn, I should say, the city within Shatterscarp. It's very much like the Wild West of the Living Lands. And the Living Lands itself in the world and context of Eora, for those, I guess, not familiar. And if you're not familiar, you should listen to this podcast. It's really good for that kind of stuff. So Shatterscarp and the Living Lands, they exist in my mind as like the Australia of Eora, where like in the British colonial era, you know, Australia was like the prison island that was this weird place that nobody goes to. And that's very much what the Living Lands is about, is it's the Australia of Eora in my mind. So Shatterscarp is kind of the last untamed area of the Living Lands. It's, you know, some very hardy folk living out that way in Thirdborn, and it's kind of like a pirate city. You know, it's a pretty rough and tumble place, kind of like the you know, early American West, I guess would be a good example, just without like the banjos and guitars and stuff.
That's good. I don't think that would have fit as much.
So when you're writing, you know, on the note of like diegetic understanding of things, when we look at a desert biome in any game, we know the two options there. You have Disney's Arabian Nights, and then you have like Yellowstone cowboy stuff, but different. You know, RDR2, right? And those are your options. You could come in and be like, da, 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 and then go really like Eastern sounding with like a Phrygian scale, like da, 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 and you can do that kind of thing. And you play it with like a duduk or something like that, which is a Armenian reed instrument or double reed instrument that sounds very desert-y. Every desert song is like duduk and sitar. Or you have like American Western, spaghetti Western, baritone guitar, cowboy open voicing chords. You've got your banjo or harmonica, viola, or violin played as a fiddle and whatnot. And Shatterscarp was like, well, it's a desert, but like, God, I don't want to do that. Like, that's just not interesting at all. And one of the biggest things we had early on was Obsidian and I had talking about was an immersive audio experience. And that was the most important thing to us, was everything has to be super interesting and immersive. And when we look at our two options for desert music, either one of those, I think, just breaks the illusion, where it's like, oh my God, it's a sitar and a duduk with reverb on them. How creative, Venus Theory. You're a genius. Or, wow, there's like banjos and harmonica here. You're an idiot, Venus Theory. Like, that doesn't fit at all. So it was about trying to find a natural answer rather than an obvious answer. So with Shatterscarp, and it came down to the audio design team. Honestly, it was walking around Shatterscarp for probably about 2 hours and walking through Thirdborn and talking to people and kind of listening, like very critically listening. And the thing that kept standing out to me, and again, being a very visual guy, if you watch like a video of the desert and there's wind, it's the wind that pushes the sand over the crests within the sand. Like there's those little wisps of sand kind of brushing away in the dust and things like that. So that was kind of the line, I think, that stood out to me, is like, when we try to represent the desert musically, this is what we're doing, is it's dry and arid and open. So the lead instrument in most of Shatterscarp's establishing melodies and moments is a violin played in like very short little rapid bowing flutters that I put some delay and stuff on because it's like the sand wisping away. And then I'm trying to develop that texture a little bit more, because in the region of Shatterscarp, I personally felt that the sound was more important than the music, because it better represents what that region truly is. As an untamed, unconquered landscape, it is a character in itself. Just like the Living Lands is, Shatterscarp is very much an imposing figure. So it was kind of letting the audio take over there for a minute before we develop Shatterscarp's themes and motifs that develop later on in the track. So yeah, that one was a real challenge, just because it was like, what are we trying to say here? And again, if I'm going to say something, it has to be something important and it has to be something right. because otherwise it's just going to feel very obvious and boring and dumb.
Yeah. Well, and you're not a fan of the rules in art, like you said, anyway.
No,
So it's not
exactly.
going to
Like
be
it would have
cowboys
just,
or Arabian Nights. That makes sense.
yeah. So that
I,
one was a real challenge, but I think it took, I don't know, that one easily took just about the longest to figure out like what is the sound of this place.
I want to honor the time that we had, so we'll do some of the closing questions. First thing I want to know, you're obviously really big into music composition, music production. You're nerd about that stuff, I would say. Is there any like a standout music nerd moment somewhere in this soundtrack that me and no one
Ah,
else will understand, but maybe one or two people
hmm.
listening will be like, "Oh, I get it." Is there a music nerd moment
In
that you want to kind of geek out about?
Probably in the final dungeon you'll run into in Emerald Stair, there's a pretty fun thing that's done with two of the core character themes, and I'm going to be very happy if anyone picks up on what happens there.
Okay. All right. I'll pay attention to the final dungeon in the Emerald Stair thing.
Yeah, it's the
Okay.
last one you'll go through, and it's I will say it's very related to the conversation you have there at the end of it and what you learn. And the character themes do something kind of fun to reflect that. And I'm very curious if anyone's going to pick up on it.
Okay. Well, if anyone listening to this, let's see if we can crack this code because I definitely want to know what it is that you're. I can see like the smile on your face. You're
Yeah.
like very proud of this very little moment, and that's exactly what I wanted to ask that question for. You said that you have listened to this show as part of the process, which thank you. I'm glad that this show was able to impact you. I
I'm
should
glad the
probably.
show existed. It probably saved my ass on this gig.
Honestly, man, I am over the moon that it was able to be part of your process. It's probably a bad time to tell you I made most of it up on the spot. A lot of it's false, but hey, it's too late now. So it came out good in the end. Because this is a lore program, what of the lore in the world of Eora, either in one of the episodes or just in the game or even in Avowed, what was one of the pieces of lore that you found the most interesting?
I don't know,
If
man. That's a whole dissertation, isn't it?
it could
I,
be, yeah,
I I
I mean, even if
think
it's just a topic.
maybe just because of relating to the player character and then the god you discover in the game. I guess I'll name them with that. I thought the interest of the Adiran Empire was kind of fun in just sort of what it represents in the context of Eora is that there is no one, I don't know, clear force. And I thought it was kind of fun to think of the Adiran Empire as someone trying to, it's like the Jurassic Park thing. It's, you were so preoccupied with whether or not you could, you didn't ask if you should. And I thought that was kind of a fun thing with like the Adiran Empire trying to sort of dominate this world that's so magical and mystical. And I think a couple other things I really thought were interesting to examine were the idea of the wheel and, taking another turn around the wheel and things like that. And just the representation of magic in the world of Pillars of Eternity and Eora, I think is such an interesting thing where it's dominant as like a science. Like it's a very like, yeah, there's magic and stuff. Like that's just how the rules of the universe are. And I thought that was a really cool way to look at magic. And in the story of Avowed, the godlike idea was really cool. And it's set in the intro exposition cutscene. By some it's seen as a blessing, by many it's an abomination. And I thought that was such an interesting take on like you're not this like big force to be reckoned with. You're kind of like, oh, that's that like weird kid I don't want to invite to my birthday party because their face is all screwy. But I think that's such a cool thing. Yeah, probably the Adiran Empire, and then the way the gods are handled in the Pillars universe, I think, is super fun, where they're not a benevolent or malevolent force. They're just kind of a problem more than anything. Like they're kind of bad at their job, I guess. And I think that's so cool. It's just yeah, like we talked about a little bit before we started chatting here. It's just there's so many layers to a lot of those things, and I think that really just made my brain tick in terms of like how do we represent these ideas.
The gods are easily one of my favorite topics as well. So yeah,
Well,
like
yeah, there's just so much to
there's
it.
the depth of the writing and like but I'm not gonna get into it. We will be here for too long.
Yeah, no.
All right. Where's a good place to start on your YouTube channel if anyone wants to check it out?
um, I would say anywhere within like the last 2 years, I think is the more interesting content I've developed. I took a pretty hard turn away from what I got on YouTube doing, and I think more of what I'm interested in and more of what my channel is about is just the psychology and philosophy of art and creative work and what it means to do that in the landscape we're currently in. So I would say anywhere within the last 2 years is kind of a safe bet.
I did notice that, like, it shifted a lot towards psychology and philosophy, which I'm also, like, a big fan of, so that was more my content anyways. I checked out the Liminal Ambient episode, that was my first one, and it was a good one because I understood
Thanks.
all of it. Okay, so you didn't play Pillars of Eternity before getting into Avowed. Did you play
No.
Pillars of Eternity all after you got the gig?
Yeah, I tried to. They're very long games though.
Yeah.
So
It would have
I
been a
didn't
month out
get
of the gate.
to Yeah, I didn't get to play through them all the way. I just kind of skimmed around the game as much as I could, and I watched a lot of Let's Plays on YouTube for like the later stages of the game, just to have an understanding of how the the story and the characters evolve and stuff like that.
What kind of character did you make? That's the most important question.
In Pillars,
Yeah.
um, honestly, I don't remember. I think I just kind of randomized everything just so I could really get into it. I
Yeah,
think
I
I was
mean,
mostly playing as kind of like the warrior archetype. I'm always into just like bashing people over the head with a hammer.
hey, it works,
But
man. Tried and
I
true
thought
method.
them. I think it was in Deadfire. I played more mage heavy though, but I feel like Deadfire is better when you use the magic.
Oh, yeah.
I
Agreed.
guess
I like
like
the
it
magic in
just I
Deadfire.
felt the combat was like more sensible because if you do like a I don't know warrior archer or whatever you want to call your like warrior build in Deadfire, I again I just haven't had enough time to really digest that game because it is so long. But I think the way that the combat encounters play out in Deadfire, the mage archetype is a little more suited to that game. But in Pillars One, being a warrior felt great.
One point that was important I didn't actually hit on, and you mentioned in an email before, was like the idea of having iconic melodies and harmonies. And you referenced, I think the Souls-like games or Soulsborne
Mhm.
games as that. Why was that an important aspect for you with Avowed?
Being very much, as we said, a degenerate gamer, I feel like a lot of Western games in particular have just been kind of like, here's some music on top of something, and it's not, I don't know, not anything too interesting. It's like just generally playing things pretty safe. But I feel like, Dark Souls and Elden Ring and stuff like that have done a really interesting job of doing stuff that's like, it's not very melody heavy, actually. It's like very textural and aleatoric from like a compositional standpoint. But I thought it was really cool that it stands out so much, and that was kind of the mission I wanted to do with Avowed is both respecting the world of Eora and the Pillars franchise, as well as the version of myself that enjoyed games like this when I was younger and had time to really sink my teeth into them. I want to find those things that I could hum back to myself, but I didn't want them to be super boring. So there's a lot of use especially later in the game of things like Indian classical music theory, where I'm getting away from how we work in Western music with how a scale or a key functions. But it was important to me to try and establish in every region a melody that is like when you're in Dawnshore, oh, that's the Dawnshore thing, da 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 da, that kind of thing, or like the title theme, da 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 da, which it's easy to hum back to yourself, and you probably remember that part. And that theme is going to come up a lot in the rest of the soundtrack of the game. And like the Envoy's theme is all over the soundtrack, and Ludwine's theme is all over the soundtrack. So it was an important thing to make sure that, like, when we're doing themes, they're not obvious, but they're very intentional with how they're placed so that they become memorable through inevitably the lens of nostalgia.
I think our emotions pick up on the subtlety
Yeah,
way more than we realize anyways.
absolutely.
Was there ever a low point that you had during the 8 months of writing for
Oh,
this, and what did you
God.
learn from that?
I mean, naturally being an artist, very much, I'm a very, very sensitive guy sometimes. But yeah, I mean, there were a lot of uncertainties, just especially not being the natural pick for a game like this. There was a lot of imposter syndrome. And then just like, even on the zooming out level of like, oh my God, like I'm working on an Obsidian game right now. What the hell is happening in my life? But
Did your wife have to calm you down a few times, I
oh
imagine?
yeah, there were some definite mentee bees, mental breakdowns. I took a mentee bee in a bath probably like at least once or twice a week just to go sit in the bathtub and like zone out and just like process everything and have a good cry. But yeah, there were a lot of really low points of just like I don't know what to do here, and I don't know why I'm doing this because this is not my thing. But then again, kind of like we talked about the lack of an ability to use an orchestra, it was like, well then why not just use that as the advantage? Like if we have these things and we're not doing them, what happens differently? What licenses do we get creatively to take? And I thought it was cool just to be able to lean more into a very personalized experience of how I think the game sounds and feels. And then, ultimately just understanding that, which is something I'm going to talk about in my YouTube video more at length. The ultimate takeaway from this project, both on the lowest of lows and the highest of highs, is that in creative work, problems only exist as problems when you acknowledge them as one.
One I wanted to ask, and this is more of a me personal thing. My favorite in isolation track off of the soundtrack, so just on its own when I'm driving around delivering, was Into Parts Unknown. For me,
All right, right on.
it had like a hopefulness to it that I really need, because I also have mental breakdowns quite often. I tell my coworkers all the time, I cry in the shower like a real man. But Into Parts Unknown had like a little hopefulness to it that I really liked. So I was just curious about like the process for that song, what what you were trying to capture with that, and what the process was, I guess, in general.
Actually, if memory serves, the second core piece of music I wrote for the game, the first thing I wrote in the game was all the cutscenes. That's usually where I start, and I think that's coming from a background of like trailer composition and media composition. Like writing to picture is always a little easier because of the linearity of it. But Into Parts Unknown, it's a very interesting track. It's one of my favorites on the OST as well because of the chord progression. I think it's a really fun progression that establishes this sense of adventure, and it's represented by an off-kilter. I believe it's in 5/8 or 7/8, I want to say. So it's not a cycle that resolves. It's kind of this infinite question. And to me, it was represented by the ships in the harbor. But if you do something in 6/8, it turns into like, it's a pirate's life for me. So it couldn't be in 6/8 because it's not pirate music or like Irish folk music. So 5 or 7, whatever it ended up being in, was cool because it's a cycle that raises a rhythmic question that's never quite answered. And I tried to do that with the chord progression as well. And the song, I mean, even the title, Into Parts Unknown, representative of where you are in the story. It takes place at the docks in Dawnshore when you first encounter Kai, and you kind of go on the side quest to go fight the bear in the woods. But that's what it's about. You are now experiencing the Living Lands for the first time, and we have never been here in the Pillars franchise. We are going quite literally into Parts Unknown, both in the game or like, fourth wall breaking experience reference, as well as the Envoy themselves. That's the first time they're going into a new place. And that track was also pretty representative of my feelings at that time of like, I've never done something like this. So like musically, I am foraying into Parts Unknown, which is
That is
a lot of where that
fantastic.
title came from. But that was it really was the harmony in the chord progression that I think resolves this rising and falling and rising and falling, which is kind of like the seashore crashing behind you, as well as those landscapes in front of you, the craggy peaks of the mountains, the lows of the plains, the, twisting vines of the forest, and kind of the imposing character of Paradies.
I think that it captures a real, like, because you talk about how some of the feelings you're trying to get with that song. That's got to be one of the perfect ones to have right at that moment, because I think it really promotes, like, emotionally speaking, a sense of curiosity, which I think is probably one of the key things you could try to
Mhm.
subtly seed into the player at that point in time.
Yeah, it was very much curiosity and just adventure. Like we've completed the prologue, we've learned the gameplay mechanics and such, and as the envoy, now it's time. Like we're ready to experience this world, and that's what I wanted to raise there was just this like, all right, let's go.
Well, it worked on this player. Let's see. You've mentioned that the music gets weirder as the
Yeah.
soundtrack progresses, and that's on purpose for very good reasons, which I'm sure we can't talk about at this point. Uh,
Not too in detail, but yeah, we
not
could
not in terrible
sorta.
detail. What's the weirdest song and why?
Oh God. I think the final region of the game has one of the weirder cues. Maybe we'll put a pin in that though. I think by the time you get into Gallowayne's Tusks, it starts to really evolve into something pretty different. That's the song You Will Know More Than Witness here. There's a lot of strange instruments. It's not really in any one key. It kind of drifts around different tone centers, and that's pulling from the idea of Indian classical music theory, which is, long story short, I'm not an expert in this by any means. I'm fascinated with it because of Derek Trucks from the Allman Brothers Band and Tedeschi Trucks and Derek Trucks Band. He plays slide guitar much like an Indian like sitar or something like that, because he's using ragas, which essentially mean a way of phrasing a scale. There's certain notes you're allowed to use, but there's certain notes that are only allowed to be used in a certain way. But it's all drifting around a tonal center. So sometimes going up, it's very major, and down, it's very minor. But sometimes it's minor going up only for the first half, but then major at the top, and then it ascends and descends from there differently and drifts into a different key. But it's not really a key, it's just more of like a tone center. So by, yeah, sort of the end of Emerald Stair, getting into Galwain's Tusk and into Shatterscarp, and especially into the final region of the game, it really gets away from, a standard orchestra, especially. And that was something I wanted to do, was and heavily influenced by Ben Frost's work on 1899 and Dark. Of 1899 especially, there's a lot of use of different world ensembles. So if we think of a Western orchestra, there's the strings, the woodwinds, the brass, the percussion, right? Like big cymbal swells and bass drums and cello and violas and blah, 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 blah. But when we have a violin playing a lead line, why not use like the Indian Dilruba to play the violin part? And why not use a duduk as part of the woodwinds section? And why is the percussion all built up of like Western orchestral percussion? Why can't we use like Chinese drums and Japanese drums and, like Native American frame drums and things like that? So that was kind of the mission of the score, is just as you will experience in the story, which we won't get into, but as you will experience in the story, the closer you get to the answers, the weirder things become. And that's how the score had to be. In Dawnshore, very orchestral, pretty straightforward, lots of little hidden things and textures and kind of weird moments. And it's supposed to be, because there is a mystery here. But as you start to get closer to the answers, it devolves and gets a little more experimental and a little more weird. So there's a lot of later use of things like spectral synthesizers and tape delays and tape loops and, weird organic sound processing and things like that. Just to, again, like we talked about kind of at the beginning, understand what the expectations are and utilize that in order to kind of subvert that. Because I know what you're waiting for. So by knowing what you're waiting for, I'm allowed to do something different, and that hopefully stands out for better or for worse. But in the final region of the game, that's one of the fun ones, because for me it's a very, very special song. But it's the theme of one of the most pivotal character in the game, to some degree, arguably. It's their theme drawn out across the entire composition, and we've only heard the theme as it's played, which you will hear in the title song. It's in there. You got to listen for it, but
Everything's
it's in the title
song. I'm convinced.
It's all in the title song. But that character's theme is then pulled apart into the entire exploration music for that region. But just like what that character is and what they represent, as well as the domain that they reside in and how it exists and what it represents, it's never quite in time. So the whole thing drifts in and out of time based solely on like a feeling and trying to find the most natural moment that, like, where does this chord swell back in and where is the pocket of the beat and things like that. So there's some really challenging moments from a composer's perspective to nail things like that down, and especially in the context of now I need to take this song apart and make it dynamic in the game engine. But yeah, and then the character themes are also kind of a fun fact. They're all connected. It's actually all one line.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
Oh, damn,
it's all in the title song.
It's all. I've listened to that title track so many times.
And I'm sure as you play the game and you see more cutscenes and like find the character themes and stuff, you're going to go back to the title song and be like, got it.
I have already, like, and I'm sure a lot of others have, like, I've already heard some parts. I'm like, oh, I recognize that from the title track. I also, like, I deliver UPS for a living. So I've listened to this on repeat for literally 3 days straight at this point in time. And I see what you're saying too. Cause like in the first half of the soundtrack or first bit, I can deliver my parcels and kind of know also where I am when I get back to the vehicle, where I am in a particular track. But when I get to the later ones, I have to look at like, which piece am I listening to? Where am I? I can't I get lost a little bit more in that like different structure. Did you specifically choose? You said like, there was Indian, Chinese, and Greek influences. Did you specifically choose those world influences over other culture influences for any reason, or was that just ones you're more familiar with?
To some degree, yes. To some degree, no. Part of it is always just the ultimate job as the composer is to serve the game, obviously, and the ultimate job there is find the sound that works best here. So sometimes instruments were chosen because I had a very specific vision, and sometimes they were chosen out of necessity because of like, what is the natural soundscape of this region? So what's going to cut through the mix better there? Okay. But a lot of it too was very much like a cultural thing of okay, so with like the Pargrunen and such, we've got more like choral things. The Pargrunen chant's very important there. It's a very hardy region. It probably has kind of very sharp sounds to it. You know, like in Galwain's Tusk, these like very sharp volcanic rocks and such. We need to evoke that. But otherwise, Paradise, I think, is a classic example of really trying to understand like what types of instruments would these people have? What types of rhythms would they be playing? How would they construct a melody based on how melodies were sort of put together during a time like this and things
Really
like that.
thinking about the meta of what these
Yeah.
people would be doing in this world.
And then just trying to find new and unusual combinations of things. So in orchestration, there's a common thing called orchestral coloring, where um, if you have violins playing, you might pair those violins with a viola, or you might pair those violins with a cello, or you might pair those violins with an oboe, or you might pair them with the flutes, or whatever, right? And these different combinations have different meanings. Like if we think of I don't know, some of the moments in like Lord of the Rings where there's like the big French horn sections where it's just a very obviously big, glorious moment. If you played that exact same melody with that exact same rhythm with, say, an English horn in a very soft dynamic, completely changes the emotion of what that melody and stuff means. So that was also a thing I was trying to figure out was by using different instruments, especially from different world regions, what are some new colors that we can access from like a compositional standpoint and pairings that we can get that are more unusual that just kind of twinge your ears like, huh, that's different.
Was there a piece within the entire soundtrack that you wanted to talk about and we haven't talked about it yet?
Oh man, I think probably my favorite piece is one of the later cutscenes in the game where you get to hear the Envoy's theme as it was written for the first time. I won't do the spoilery version of it, but it's when you finally get to the point where you get the final answers of everything and start making the decisions that involve the end game. And it's funny because the Envoy's theme is everywhere in the soundtrack. And it's fun because I didn't want to write the Envoy's theme. I wanted to write your Envoy's theme. And choice is a huge part of this game, and especially in how it all plays out. So when you play the game, as you're playing it right now, maybe you're like the good guy archetype or something, right? You get a different version of the Envoy's theme based on the choices that you make. So the Envoy's theme and other character themes as well actually adapt to the different choices that you make, and it sounds different based on that. But there's one cutscene towards the end of the game where you walk up and ascend into a place where you're going to get the answers, and oh my god, it's just the most glorious, over the top, like big thing. I think that's my favorite musical moment of the game. But I think what's fun is sort of not spoilery, but like Ludwine's theme is the only one that never changes because Ludwine never changes. Inquisitor Ludwine as a character is very steadfast, with the Steel Garrote and her interests in the Living Lands, and her dedication to Wodoka is so hardcore, and that's why her theme is the way it is.
That makes sense. I just learned something important about her in the game
Okay,
that I
yeah.
think explains why that would be the case. Why it would
So
only be the one
her
song.
theme is the only thing that never ever changes because she is, on a mission, and that's who her character is. Whereas the Envoy is like a little more fluid based on the choices you make, and then the other pivotal character is incredibly ambiguous. So that's how their theme was written. It's not major or minor or anything, and it also kind of flows and adapts and is hidden throughout the soundtrack in a lot of different places. But yeah, the Envoy's theme I think is one of the things I'm really particularly happy with because it's in a lot of the exploration music, it's in a lot of the cutscene music, obviously, but it evolves and changes based on you, and I thought that was really fun.
That's such a cool idea that like the music would actually be different throughout so like me and other players, I'm on another podcast called Avowed. We're each gonna have like a sonically different experience
I
by
will be
the end of the
very
game.
curious to hear all of your reactions then on the ending cutscene, the final cutscene you get before the sort of exposition closing happens, because based on the ending you get, the ending music is entirely different. I won't tell you how many there are, but there are, a good handful of endings and
Yeah.
different
That's
cutscenes that all
That's a
got their
number
own
you can
music.
reveal, months from now after everyone's gotten
Right.
there a few
Yeah.
times. Okay, I'm glad you told me that because now I'm going to like record my ending of my gameplay and then ask others to do as well, so I can
Yeah,
compare.
it's all different based on which one you get. And I was very, very pressing Obsidian for that, because originally it was just going to be two kind of musical options, and I was like, no, the emotional implications of this are so different that everyone needs its own thing.
Well, yeah,
And there's
if choice really does matter,
yeah,
then
exactly. And that's the thing, is like, if choice matters, we need to make it matter on every level all the way through. And that was really important. But that's a fun one. And you know, I assume you'll play through the game again at some point. I'll be
Oh, yeah.
curious if you get one of the other endings.
That's cool. I love to thank you for telling us that. Any shout outs that you'd like to give to like any other people that have helped you in this process? Like obviously your wife has been very
Oh
instrumental
God,
and
yeah.
supportive.
I mean, I
But
don't think I'd be able to do anything without my wife. You know, my good friends Ben Jordan, especially Christopher Floyd, they've been instrumental in kind of keeping me in check. Jason Graves, another composer friend, very close. He's been such a guiding light on, like, you know, as someone who he's obviously done a lot of very large games and also gotten a lot of like very negative feedback on certain situations. He's been very helpful just to be like, here's the lay of the land, man. But yeah, I mean, Ryan Warden, the production director of Obsidian, just it's been such a pleasure to work with him and get to experience working with such a large studio that's so important to me as both like a gamer and as a person. Like, Obsidian games are a part of who I am, just with the time I've put into their games. But yeah, Ryan easily was just like the biggest help throughout all of this, because he was so helpful in like helping me understand the lore or different angles of things. And you know, a lot of the creative team, especially I think Dylan, the audio, I guess not really head of audio, but like the audio person I dealt the most with directly, he was awesome in helping. And Berto at Obsidian, who was responsible for making the dynamic music system kind of come to life. And I think that, you know, the Obsidian team, it blew my mind. Not only that, like, did I get this gig and get it done, and it came together in a way that I'm just like so incredibly proud of, but the way that they elevated my ideas to do the thing that I think game music does best and what makes it special, to really make it an immersive thing, was just so awesome. But yeah, Ryan, especially, who is the producer of the OST, yeah, no way I would have got through this without him, because there were many times where I was just banging my head into my desk.
we're not an island, right? Like we
Right.
rely on other people and the unsung heroes to get these things done. It's awesome to hear other people getting credit for like the instrumental parts that they played in this process.
Well, and you know, no game comes together without obviously a team. Like the indie titles I've worked on, even, it's 2 or 3 people who are just incredibly passionate about a thing, and it's so important to leverage the idea of teamwork, because that's ultimately what games are. Is it's a collaborative thing. And I think even on the gamer end, like, what makes games special is how they connect us and our experiences. And I think that's all art. So I think it's cool to see that, especially even at a big studio, I thought this would be so much more corporate-y, I guess. And it's not. Like, it's just a bunch of really nerdy people who are insanely passionate about something. And that is like the most inspiring experience possible, really.
I've had several interactions with Obsidian, and I've also like I've never worked with them obviously to the same extent you have, but I've sent emails, you know, even just asking for permission for this or that, and they've always had that kind of
Mhm.
feel about them. They're just a bunch of nerds, but they're authentic people, and
Yeah, and
that's
that's
awesome. It's cool
the
to
best
see
thing.
like those passionate people, and it's really awesome to see that they saw that same thing in you, that like you kind of have that Obsidian quality, and that's why Ryan sought you out, because you clearly have a lot of passion for this.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the most important thing. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the YouTube video where I dropped this, but my favorite quote of all time comes from a video game. It's from Battlefield 3, and it's that you only get to die once, so make sure it was worth it.
Yeah,
And I
I've
think
heard you say that a few times.
it's such an important philosophy to me, just as a person, because if you're not passionate about something and not interested in doing something, like, you don't have to do that, and you should do things that fulfill you more.
I think it's a really powerful idea. The idea, like, just you don't have to do that is one thing I don't think people give themselves enough permission to do.
Yeah.
And like when you pair it with that, like you only die once. It doesn't matter what worldview you come from. That's one of the few facts that everyone agrees on. You only die once. Well, I think so. I'm sure there's some people out there
Well,
that
I mean,
think something
unless you're
different.
like one of the Kith and Eora, then you go around the wheel again, and it's
Yeah,
a
there you go,
whole
over and over
ordeal.
again.
But like,
That was
you
such a
know,
nerdy thing you just said there, Cameron. I appreciate it. I'm here for it. So this has been nearly a year of your life. What's on the horizon? Like, what's next for you?
Oh God, hopefully a nap. That sounds kind of wonderful. Obviously, I've got to finish my course I'm doing about the soundtrack of this. Doing a lot of press right now, which is super fun, and get a lot more podcasts and things like that. Spinning up on the Ground Branch soundtrack, which I think will be nice because I'm happy. I'm just so over the moon with how this soundtrack turned out, and even listening to it just makes me so emotional because like I just put so much of myself into these songs on a lot of different levels and like where I was at when I wrote that song and whatever. And I think that's really important. But it's nice now to have Avowed done, and it's like I put it in a box and it goes over there. We're done now. So I'm kind of excited to get into some other game scores and just break away into something entirely different. Like Ground Branch is very much, shooty, blowy, uppy, modern action game. So that's going to be a fun thing to do and an interesting thing to explore now that I've done something like this, to see the lessons I've learned throughout this process. How can we try and take that to the next level in other titles? But, got some YouTube videos I'm working on and hopefully going to release a bit of a back catalog of music just because I've also been writing, other music. Like I write music all the time. It's my favorite thing in the world to do. So then, like, when I get to do it for a video game, it's like, this is the greatest thing I've ever done. Because that's, I'm very, very lucky insofar as that I get to make videos on the internet about things I'm interested in and write music and sometimes write music for video games and movies. Like, that is the coolest job in the world. And that's so privileged. And I'm so lucky to get to do that. But I've also got a lot of music I've written just in the background that needs to be
I'm sure there
dumped.
was a lot on the cutting room floor for this project.
Yeah, and that was another thing is I'm curious to explore a lot of the music that didn't get put in the game and just, where does this idea exist outside of that? Or like, does it go into a different game maybe? Or like, do we just like save it for a rainy day or whatever? Yeah. And then, lots of other things I want to explore and lots of new toys and gear I've picked up throughout this process that I'm like, I'd really love to sit down and make a song with that thing again.
Let's close off with asking, this is what I usually tell my listeners. Besides Avowed, what are you currently playing as video games right now?
Man, I'm just excited to play Avowed for the sake of enjoying it instead of just like working on it.
That's fair.
Yeah, Avowed I'm pretty excited for. I've been playing, I just finished Sons of the Forest with my friend, which is a fun kind of romp in the woods. It's a game, I enjoyed it.
I believe a fun kind of romp in the woods is exactly what the Steam description for that game is anyway.
Pretty much, yeah. Generation Zero I've been liking a lot, which is like a cool sort of sci-fi shooter, I guess I would say. Dying Light 2 playing through, which is really fun. Days Gone, I started playing, I think I played the first 20 minutes and I set it down because I was like, I need to soak this game in. This is not one I can like pick up and play for an hour and come back to later. This is one I need to just like get a bag of Fritos and a can of Hormel chili and lock myself in my room for a week and take it all in. And then, yeah, just kind of my usual games because I don't have a ton of time to play games. So I'm a big fan of games that I can just kind of pick up and play. Battlefield is always one of my go-tos. I love the Battlefield franchise so much. And funny enough, and I know as divisive as the score of Avowed is to some people, some of the soundtracks I love the most are like the most divisive in the gaming community. Like Battlefield 2042's soundtrack just hit different, man. I loved that score, but a lot of people just absolutely hated it. So yeah, Arma, DayZ, Battlefield, kind of quick pick up and play games.
I can see you scrolling on your screen there.
I'm looking through my recent play stuff on Steam here. Enshrouded has been really good. I've kind of gotten to the end of where it's at in the early access phase. So I'm just kind of waiting for more content to be added to that right now. Ground Branch, the other game I'm scoring. I love that game. It's so fun just to like pick up and blow things up. Middle Earth, Shadow of War, I was playing a little bit, but kind of getting a little burnt out on. And then, of course, Fallout. But I actually had to, I can see right now Fallout is uninstalled because when I started working on Avowed, I was like, I need to uninstall Fallout or I'm going to get nothing done. Because it was, like I said, when I was originally approached to do the score, I was kind of right in between projects. And I was like, I'm going to play Fallout again. And that's one of those ones where like, I will lose weeks of my life playing Fallout.
Oh, man.
But yeah, those are kind of my current ones.
first step is admitting you have a problem. So uninstalling it was a good sign, I guess.
Yeah, it was one of those ones of like, and I just started to play through and like just got through kind of the, you know, initial missions and like got some power armor and stuff and was like really getting into that playthrough. And it was like, I got to turn this off or I'm not going to get anything done. But I love those games so much. I've burnt way too much time. And Daisy as well. I don't know what it is about that game, but man, that gets me. That game and I understand each other on a spiritual level.
Everyone's got their game that represents them. So
right.
People listening, if you want to understand Venus Theory, play some Daisy, and you'll get them a little bit more. Last question before we close this out for the podcast, anyways. Most important question: what's your favorite Obsidian game, and why is it the South Park game?
Stick of Truth. Oh man, what a weird game. That was such a fun playthrough. That was I feel like Stick of Truth though was the writing on that was just so funny. And I really liked how it came together. I mean like I knew it was going to be good cuz South Park is one of the most interesting pieces of media I think in like contemporary media analysis in that it has stayed consistently good and funny for like I mean, God, what, 20 years or almost 20 years now?
Yeah, decades,
like,
man.
Yeah, because I remember watching South Park when I was like a kid.
Yeah, and, secretly when your parents weren't watching.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, it was 11 o'clock at night and South Park was on Comedy Central and there was like the Girls Gone Wild commercials and stuff. Like, God, being 7-year-old in the 2000s was awesome. Yeah, and yeah, Stick of Truth was, I think that's almost a benchmark in good writing for a franchise that just stuck to like South Park so well. But yeah, I think obviously New Vegas. I'm a huge Fallout nerd, like a hardcore Fallout nerd, which I was so happy when I discovered your podcast because you remind me a lot of Oxhorn. I don't know if you're familiar with him on YouTube.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah, I kind of dove into the Fallout community.
So when I found your podcast, I was like, oh my God, it's like the Oxhorn, but for like the game I'm scoring. Perfect. Like this guy will know what's happening. But yeah,
I'm glad my life's purpose coalesced into those two spheres of Oxhorn and the World of Eora.
Man, I don't know. Yeah, New Vegas was just so good. But you know what a hot take that is. Like New Vegas is a great game.
And that's fine, man. Like if that's the answer, that's the answer. It's a great game.
And I think it just happens because like Fallout 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and I know like Fallout 4 was bad, but like I loved Fallout 4. I still love Fallout 4. I've put way too many hours into Fallout 4. Yeah, I think New Vegas was pretty ridiculously good. The only one I have not played, I think, outside of some of the other like I'm working through Pentiment still, but that's just kind of it's just a very different game.
Oh, it's incredibly different. Very, very different.
Where it's almost like a visual novel, I think, I don't know, at least in some respect. But the only one I have not played yet is Grounded, which is funny because like that's a really, really, really popular game. But I just missed the boat on that. Like I think when it came out, I was just kind of busy, and then I just haven't had time to try that one. And then I still need to finish Outer Worlds. But that one I don't remember what happened. I was like probably 3/4 of the way through Outer Worlds, and then just got busy with like a YouTube project or something. Which is just,
and that happens, right? Like we all have did not finish lists as gamers. Like it happens. Sometimes it's just a game you're just not vibing with. Like Pentiment, you really need to be.
It's a mood piece. It's really interesting. Like it's a very challenging game for me, and I almost feel like it's kind of like I feel like my music in Avowed is almost an exercise in patience. But you know, that's what I think is interesting, and also like. With the way the music had to be built for Avowed, it had to be kind of long and super ambient and not like melody all the time. But that was just a byproduct of like the incredibly short time scale we had to make it on. But yeah, I think that's why Obsidian is so special to me. It's just they've been so consistently good in pretty much everything. and you know, just like the writing teams and whatever, and like just on the ultimate nerd level. Obsidian games always make me just like, that was great. I had a good time with that. Even if it wasn't like my favorite game of all time, I respect it. And that was super cool. And it was consistent.
Yep.
And I feel like I think that's the thing that makes Obsidian's games special is just they can be as much of a time sink as you want them to be. And I think they reward that. you know, as I'm sure you've learned with this podcast, is like there's a lot of layers to just about everything.
Yep, boy, I did not know what I was getting into.
Yeah, maybe Grounded should be next on my like things to play after I have time to play Days Gone, but Grounded seems like that's going to be more kind of fun and goofy is sort of the vibe.
It's a very fun and goofy game. It definitely had to be with it from the beginning to have some of the charm of it, but as a
because that was like
product,
Rainbow Six Siege. I completely missed the boat on Rainbow Six Siege, and Ben Frost like scored it, and I loved the soundtrack for Siege. And then by the time I was gonna buy Siege and play it, it was just like a completely different game.
yeah, and that happened. Yeah, I mean that's just kind of the nature of the beast sometimes, especially with early access titles.
Yeah,
like Grounded would be the the whole if you're on a desert island, what would you take? Grounded is my desert island video game, 100%.
Really? Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe that's a pretty strong endorsement. Maybe I need to give that one a play.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I kind of want to go
highly
back. I kind of want to play Knights of the Old Republic again, but I don't know. Put a lot of hours into that, and I feel like that game is way more fun with friends, and I don't have like friends anymore.
Well, that
I'm
was
busy.
actually why I ended up playing Grounded. My brother and my friend and I, we play games and we can't play together. But Grounded has this like shared world feature where you don't have to be online at the same time. But anyways, we don't need to talk about my life nearly as
Yeah,
much.
and then I want to go back. Someone at Obsidian, there was a whole little section of Armored Warfare because I'm looking at the website now. I was trying to remember what it was. Armored Warfare. I remember playing this as a kid, and I don't really remember the game, but I like honestly didn't even know that was Obsidian.
It doesn't seem like an Obsidian game.
Yeah, I think that was, if memory serves, that's one of their pretty early titles though, or like early-ish titles, if I'm right. And yeah, I remember seeing like someone was wearing the Armored Warfare shirt, and there was like a little Armored Warfare memorabilia thing, and I was like, oh my god, I remember that game. But that just made me feel old, honestly, a little bit. But
I'm right there with you. I think I'm 3 years older than you, so I have all those feelings plus a little bit more, 10% more old, I guess.
Slightly more back pain. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I get it. We're gonna have to call it pretty soon. I can hear my son getting ready for nap time. So
oh, cool. Well, at least I think we covered the rest of it, unless there's like a super rapid fire thing we need to address.
I think we've covered most of the stuff that I think is worth covering. Cool. But it's just honestly, it's been fun talking to you. Like you're a really down to earth person.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's weird in like the creative space. A lot of people are kind of dicks.
Like I've noticed. I'm not going to say names, but I have noticed.
Yeah. Well, sure. And like especially on the YouTube end, I've met very few YouTubers who I actually find pleasant to be around, just because they're like very YouTuber-y. And then and like in the game space too, especially in the composer space, it's so odd where the best composers I've met who have like the most accomplished resumes are the most chill people. Generally, there's a couple who aren't, but generally speaking, they're very, very chill. But I think it's because they have a lot of security in what they've done of like, I know I do good work, so I'm not like, I am better than you. But man, in the creative space in general, like music and scoring work and whatever, a lot of the people who are kind of getting their feet wet or have like one gig or whatever, just so much crazy ego. It's really weird because it's like, I mean, dude, you made music one time for a thing that did sort of well. Like that's great, but like, please shut the fuck up.
I wonder if it's almost a platform. I feel like YouTube kind of breeds those, like a lot of those.
Oh no, for sure. And that's something I've discussed at length with a lot of my YouTube friends, is like there are a lot of musicians who have a YouTube channel, but very few who are worth watching. But there are so many YouTubers who just happen to make music, and they think that they're just like this authoritative thing, which is so funny because it's like, you know, dude, if you're a YouTuber who makes music and you have like a music channel on YouTube or whatever, that's fine. But like, don't try and come across as like this seasoned industry veteran when like 5 minutes of Googling you will dispel that you've never accomplished a single thing. And that's fine. Yeah. Like, I don't think people understand that, where especially in like the music space and stuff, it's so toxic online because you know, if you look on the subreddit, I'm sure you could see everybody knows how to make a better soundtrack than I do for Avowed, that are in like the hate threads about my score. But like, fact of the matter is, I was picked to do it because I'm really good at what I do, and I do one thing very, very, very well. So it made me qualified for this gig, and that's fine. But when you're a musician, if you just enjoy making music and you've never made money from it, totally fine. A lot of people have way worse hobbies for them. You know, if you're just a boat guy, but you're not a professional boat racer, be a boat guy. Yeah. Or if you're just like, you know, a art student who's a Starbucks barista and you're really into film cameras, You don't have to become like a famous film photographer. You could just be the girl at Starbucks who takes pictures of stuff.
Yeah.
Totally, just as equally valid of an artistic expression. But, you know, kind of like I said, I think that's the price of admission is like when you stand up, you cast a shadow. A lot of people hate that. And I think it mostly because it holds up a mirror to people and they really don't like that. Because on the internet, everybody knows better than you do at everything all the time.
Oh yeah.
And then
So
some
many
like
more talented
some
people.
8-year-old on TikTok is also like way better at it than you are.
There's no shortage of talented people, much better than anyone than yourself.
But I think
get it.
that's the thing is like, you know, my advice to people who always want to build a creative career is just that like if you could be the person that people want to get a beer with, that gets you farther than anything else, easily. And that's just life advice in general. Like if you want to get a promotion at work, do good work, get shit done on time, and don't be an asshole. That generally works really well, and it works a lot better than being like some super savant, ultra qualified person who's just like sort of a dick to be around.
Yeah, I think people want to be around that. I mean, you can pursue that every day, you know, whereas being like having to achieve these great things, those are months or years down the road. But not being a dick, that's something you can do today.
Yeah, and it's such a simple thing, and it's funny because like art as a expressive medium of like human nature is very much based in ego. Like it has to be in order to express anything. But I think people forget to delineate like the expression of ego and the existence of ego in a creative field where just like I'm better than you are and I did this, therefore I'm better than everybody who uploads random garbage to SoundCloud. And I don't think that's how it is at all.
I mean, that's my 3-year-old's attitude right now. Every time they do something good, he literally says, "I am the greatest," and then runs around in circles.
Well, and I think that's kind of the fun thing is like whatever you did, and I think that's the idea that a lot of artists forget to understand is that when you're an artist, no matter what you do, as soon as you solidify that thing as a creative work, you have set the bar for what that is. Because of people online, you know, love to talk about like production quality and whatever. We're like, oh, Iggy Azalea's new album was so much better than Trent Reznor's score for whatever. But it's like if you listen to Metallica now and then Metallica back in the 80s, the production of their early records was garbage. But people loved it because they were like, man, Metallica fucking rules, you know? And I think that's such an important idea that like when you solidify your thing as a creative work and this is the thing and now it's done, that's as good as it's ever going to get. And you are now the best person in the world at that one thing.
All right. I think we're over time, so I will call it there. Just want to say thank you so much for taking your time to actually sit down and talk about this. I've been very excited about it just to hear about how everything goes. And also just having watched a lot of your YouTube since you were announced as a composer, just excited to talk to you as a person. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Well, hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of the game and the rest of the soundtrack. And I hope people enjoy the soundtrack a lot because I really enjoyed making it and it was super fun and like easily the coolest experience of my life so far. Even getting to go to Obsidian, I had Fergus, the CEO, walk out of like a meeting he was in and just be like, hey, really great work on the soundtrack. Like, thanks for making that. So that was pretty peak existing for me to be like, wow.
Did you play it cool? Like a nice little handshake? Oh, thanks,
I
Fergus.
tried. I was maybe a little sweaty, but like, you know, it's kind of hard to not like fangirl a bit when you're like, oh my God, that's like literally Fergus.
All right.
Hope people enjoy the game. Hope people enjoy the soundtrack. And let me know if you find some of the little Easter eggs in it. Please, please do. I'm curious to see how many people will find.
Yeah, listeners of the show, write in any connections you have for that. All right, we'll call it there. Thanks so much. Hopefully I get to talk to you again in the future, but thanks again, man.
Yeah.
If you find your trail has run cold, come to me with whatever you have. There is much I may be able to do for you.
That's the whole conversation. Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. If you liked today's episode, please send me an email. Let me know if you'd like to hear more stuff like this. I know I really enjoyed doing it. You can do so at worldofaora@gmail.com. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can do so at World of Eora. If you're trying to get a hold of me directly, you can also do so across many different platforms, Reddit or Discord, etc. And I'm usually Gingerino or Gingerino42. If you would like to support the show directly, you can do so at ko-fi.com/World of Eora. Thank everyone for giving me 2 hours of your time for this episode, and I hope that you will check out Venus Theory's stuff. And thank you so much to Cameron, aka Venus Theory, for jumping on the show with me. It's been really awesome getting to know you, and I'm honestly over the moon that this show is part of your process for writing the soundtrack of Avowed. That was one of the things that we originally talked about. Is he emailed me a while ago talking about how this show had helped him learn some of the lore while he was also like writing this soundtrack, and I couldn't have been more excited about something like that. And he's reached out to me and initiated the conversations that eventually led to us even having this interview, and it was an amazing time. Really enjoyed it. So hopefully we can do that again. But yeah, hope you all enjoyed today's episode. Thanks everyone so much for listening. And I will just get you back to your day. Hopefully you can get home and play the game of Avowed. I've got several hours in, and I gotta say, I'm really enjoying what I'm seeing and hearing so far. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.